So the Philadelphia Eagles pick up another win against a division rival in the Washington Commanders, and this is one that I do want to talk about now. Of course, there are some things that I will catch once I go and rewatch the game, but I just want to get my overall thoughts in today's video based on what I saw live, and I think that I want to start with the Eagles offense in this one. Now, Jalen Hurts, 29 of 38, 29 completions, 38 attempts, 319 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, took 2 sacks, and had a fumble. Now, it's so funny when the fumble actually occurred because it was on a tush push attempt. Now, we talk about the brotherly shove, the tush push, whatever you want to call it at this point, and I think that seeing that DeAndre Swift actually scored on a counter of that play, that's something you had to be thinking, okay, they keep running this, they keep running this. Some team is going to sell out defensively, now offensively. We're into a point where we could just run a counter off of it. DeAndre Swift scored off of that play. But like I said, I think a very crisp and clean game from Jalen Hurts himself. That's why I want to start off with him. And when I look at the MVP right now, we talk about a team who's 7-1. We talk about Jalen Hurts. Now, he's been turning over the football. He had a fumble today. He's had fumbles. He's had interceptions. I really point to the Jets game. I think that's a game that I look at and say really a lot of turnovers that could have been avoided. And also you had ones that couldn't have been avoided. You have some tip passes, things of that nature. So looking at that, I think when we look at how he's been playing in these last 2 weeks, understanding that this is a guy, even with what he's done thus far, talking about turning over the football, I have him in my MVP conversations. I think it would have to be right now Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and then Tua Tagovailoa. And then outside of that, now you start to look at some of the other quarterbacks. I really had Jared Goff creeping into that conversation. Had a bad week last week, but I think coming into it now, we got to see what they do Monday. But overall, you look at Jalen Hurts and say, even when the offense isn't in sync, and it's so scary because you win 38-31, and I still think there are some things that can be cleaned up offensively for Philadelphia. So you say, okay, we're playing the way we're playing. We're 7-1. Now, we're going to get to the defense a little later in the video, but I'm looking at that and saying Jalen Hurts creating when he has to, scrambling when he has to, and he's been accurate on those deep balls. Now, getting into his targets and the guys who are receiving the football from him, that A.J. Brown, that's a bad man. Now, he just broke a record today. The most games in a row with more than 125 reception yards. So I think when we had, and it's funny because when I was listening, looking at some tweets, watching the game, talking about different things, I saw something that said we have to start talking about A.J. Brown in that top 5 conversation. And I don't understand where's the start. Now, start would be really insinuating that we haven't already done it. I'm already having A.J. Brown in that top 5 conversation. I look at a Tyreek Hill. I look at a Justin Jefferson, a Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams. A.J. Brown is in that conversation for me at least. And also Devontae Smith. Now, for Devontae Smith to be the number 2, or some people say he would be a number 1 on other teams, I think we look at the game he had today. The guy had 7 catches for 99 yards and had a touchdown with a long of 38 yards. So I pay attention to all of that and I say, okay, when we're looking at the secondary for the Washington Commanders, now, based on paper, they're not the most talented, but those guys play their tails off. When we look at Ron Rivera, that defense, and it hasn't really correlated to wins thus far, but we're looking at a secondary, especially St. Juice. Now, he was battling with A.J. Brown all day, especially in the red zone. So looking at that and saying, now we got Devontae Smith coming along to the party. He had a big-time game. I think you have to really pencil in A.J. Brown on the rate that he's going. You have to say this is a guy who's going to get north of 80 yards every game. So who's going to come along and who's going to be outside of that? And I look at some of these other guys. Kenneth Gainwell had 5 catches, 30 yards. Dallas Goedert, 4 catches, 36 yards. So overall, and I mean, Julio, he came in. He didn't have a big time game, but he got a touchdown in the red zone. I think you look at the weapons. You look at how Jalen Hurts distributed the football and how he really moves around in the pocket. I think that this is a guy we have to give him more props because I talked about him when he didn't have those good performances. I said, you got to take care of the football. And that interception, the last one against the New York Jets, I said, you should never, ever, ever throw that football. But to come and have a game like he did today, where they needed every single yard, every single touchdown, every single pass and play extension, I had to give my hats off to that. So that's what we have with the offense. Now, that's a lot of good with the offense. But I think we talk about the rushing game. And I'm not going to say I'm worried about Philadelphia's rushing game, but I looked at how it got stifled versus New York. I looked at how it got stifled today. Now, you got DeAndre Swift. He had 16 carries for 57 yards. I have to see, especially with the offensive line that the Philadelphia Eagles have, I have to see at least 100 yards on the ground per game. And I don't think I'm asking anything out of the ordinary. I don't think I'm asking too much because I've seen this team at their best. I've seen when they get Jason Kelce and those guys on the move, they can block and they can run the football. So I trust that it has to get back to that. But in these past couple of weeks, I just haven't seen that. Now, it's not to say because they ran the football good to start the beginning of the season. We think about DeAndre Swift. He had a great game against Minnesota, but I'm looking at what you're doing right now, and I think that once this running game creeps back into it, then you have an A.J. Brown playing like he's playing. Then you have a Jalen Hurts, if he takes care of the football, and I believe he's going to get better in that aspect. I think you're going to be well-rounded offensively, but we got to talk about it. Because defensively, I think that I want to talk about this really from a Commander's perspective, but looking at some things for the Philadelphia Eagles. Sean Desai, I'm not understanding some things that's going on defensively from a scheme perspective. Now, Sam Howell, and I talked about the Washington Commanders. I said, we look at a team, I truly don't know what the Washington Commanders are because they have a game where they're up. Sam Howell's looking amazing. We're all talking about EB as the offensive coordinator, calling up amazing plays. And I think that there's been games like that. There's been games where they run the football with Brian Robinson Jr., but there's also been games where they have duds, where they get no third down conversions, where they're turning over the football. So I look at that and say, I did not know what to truly expect today, but I think I look at the first matchup. And you have to understand in your second time playing a team like Washington, now hats off to Washington. They saw some things on film that they felt they could exploit, and they went out there and did so. But for Philadelphia, you got to say, okay, second time playing them in the season. We did not have a great output in that first game. We got to tweak some things and do some things a little differently. Now, as far as Kevin Byard, I think a lot of people will point to it and say, you got Kevin Byard, big time trade. I even did a video on the Kevin Byard trade. And then you look at a trade and say, okay, where are the results within that trade? Now, I think that it's not fair to say that just yet. The guy got traded earlier in the week. I don't think he's going to come out, be an all-pro the first game right here. So get a little more familiar with the scheme. That's not really the topic right here, though. And I look at it and say, okay, the Washington Commanders ran the football. Now, 10 carries for 59 yards, and I think that when they were in a situation where really late in the second half, late in the game, they had to throw the football. They got away from the running game a bit. But when they wanted to run the football, I think they were very good at it. You look at Antonio Gibson, he had 2 carries, 14 yards, and Sam Howell had a couple scrambles. But in the passing game, now, everyone's talked about Jahan Dotson in the manner that when you're bringing a guy like Eric Bieniemy, you have a Curtis Samuel on one side, you have a Logan Thomas at tight end, you have a Terry McLaurin who's extremely underrated still somehow. You have all of these weapons around him, and you have a pretty solid running game. We expected him, being the first round pick that he was out of Penn State, we thought he would come here into this season and be a very, very impactful player. Now, I think he's had ups and downs this season, but to see what he did today, 8 catches, 108 yards, had a touchdown, Jamison Crowder. Now, Sean Desai, and I keep talking about Sean Desai, but I could also say Reed Blankenship. I could also say James Bradbury. I could also say Darius Slay. All of the talent in the world, but it was no performance today. I mean, I talk about the defensive line, understanding Sam Howell, the guy got sacked one time. All of the guys on the defensive line, I don't even have to name them at this point because it's a very, very good defensive line, abundance of talent. But you got guys like Jamison Crowder. This guy in OTAs and training camp, he was a New York Giant. Now he's a Washington Commander. He was just a New York Jet a couple years ago. So we're looking at all of these things. He was just a Buffalo Bill. The reason that I'm saying all of these things is that this is a guy, this is his coming on party for this season. Now, we understand Jamison Crowder. He's a veteran in this league. I think he's done his dividends. We respect him as a receiver in this league. But I'm saying at this point in his career, I don't think it's safe to say he is what he used to be. And to come in here and have a game like this against a defense that's supposed to be extremely talented and good, I think that you have to look in the mirror and say we're embarrassed for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Terry McLaurin, he had 5 for 63, a touchdown. Logan Thomas, he had an amazing touchdown in the red zone. Antonio Gibson, Curtis Samuel didn't have the biggest game, but I look at Sam Howell and how he distributed the football, and I'm very excited about that. Now, I think even though you lose this game, there are some things that Eric Bieniemy, that the offense can look at and say, okay, we have something here. We just got to keep doing this. Now, we got to take care of the football. If you're talking about the Washington Commanders, you had one fumble by Sam Howell, and then you had 3 other ones which were recovering. Had an interception by Sam Howell late in the second half. And I'm looking at these things and saying the Philadelphia Eagles, be more aggressive with all of the talent you have. Now, I understand in certain situations, we don't want to run zero. We don't want to run man with one high. We don't want to do those in certain situations. But I think when you have the talent that you have, try to cater some of that scheme into those good players, into that secondary that you have. You got a Kevin Byard now. You got to Reed Blankenship back on the football field. A Darius Slayer, James Bradbury. Having the guys in the front seven, cater that and be the aggressor defensively. But I think, like I said, for Washington, I really like what they did offensively in this game, take care of the football a little more. It was a close one. Now, it really was more of a two-score. After the tush-push counter with DeAndre Swift scored, the game wasn't as close. Now, they got a late touchdown. It was 24-38. They pushed it up 31-38, kicked the onside kick, didn't get it. But I'm looking at these things and I'm saying, okay, and also to go to that, I think defensively for the Washington Commanders, you have to pay attention to some of those things as well, because I talk about the converse for both teams. I talk about defense for that team and offense for the Washington Commanders. But defensively, I think they did a good job against the run. And that's important because they haven't been doing that a lot and consistently this season. So we look at some of those linebackers and the Jamin Davis. I think it's important to give those guys their props for that, especially against a Philadelphia Eagles run game. But in the passing game, it's still something that has to be fixed. Emmanuel Forbes, the first round pick. Now, a lot of people will say different corners are on the board. Maybe you should have picked a different guy. And I think hindsight's always 20/20. I think what they did for their scheme, they saw a guy with length, with ball skills, albeit he still weighs about 160 pounds, but they saw a football player. They said they can mold this and he can be an all-pro or a pro bowler in our scheme. So I think it's too early to write off a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, but defensively, the secondary is beaten. And I think you have to talk about, for the trade deadline, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, some of those guys. You got to be paying attention. I think Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, those are the anchors on the interior, but you look at those edge guys and where do they go from here? Overall, a good win for Philadelphia. One you look at and say, we had some breaks, some pretty good moments, had some things when we talk about the referees kind of going our way just a little bit, but I don't want to take any credit from Philadelphia. I think this was a good one to watch if you did watch the football game. I feel really good about this win. 7-1. Probably going to do a film breakdown on the Philadelphia Eagles coming soon. Let me know what you think about today's game in the comments. I think it was a very good one. I like what I saw. But that's going to do it for today's show. We got more game recaps and breakdowns on the way, so stay patient. And of course, if you want to catch those game recaps, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's push this out to the algorithm. But that's going to do it for today's show. And now, we out.